offering 3 mattress collections with personalized features and the goal of providing people more choices based on their needs. Learn more at sleepnumber.com or a Sleep Number store.
This is Charlotte Talks. I'm Mike Collins. After an exceedingly long wait, North Carolina finally has a budget, one for 2025 through 2027. It's almost over. It's been held up as the General Assembly, by the General Assembly, as Republicans in both houses tried to iron out differences over tax cuts, pay raises, and more. But last week, they finally came to an agreement and sent the budget to Governor Stein for his signature. He's had little to say about it, but is scheduled to sign it this morning at 10 o'clock, although it could easily pass without his signature. This hour, we take a look at what the General Assembly hath wrought, what it may mean to you, and what it could mean to area municipalities that voted to rescind their support of the I-77 toll lanes. We're joined by Bryan Anderson, a politics reporter with the Assembly, who has been covering the State House for a very long time, and Sarah Michels is with us. She's a staff writer and North Carolina elections and State House reporter for Carolina Public Press. Good morning, both of you. Welcome.
Has
Welcome
it
back.
really been
Morning.
that many years for me? Am I getting that old? The budget's aged
I
me, I guess.
I don't have enough fingers and toes to count. That's where we are. So, Brian, last week the General Assembly, as I said, finally passed this budget. 634 pages, $34.4 billion, I think. It's for 2025 through 2027. But I checked the calendar. It's 2026. Remind us of what took so long.
Yeah, so there's been a major dispute over taxes, and that's really been the major sticking point between House and Senate Republicans. Again, a reminder for folks, unlike the federal government where there's a federal shutdown if they don't pass a budget, here in North Carolina, we don't have that shutdown because funding continues for the recurring funding at existing levels. So it's not as bad as a federal shutdown, but the stalemate comes and it affects teachers. It affects state workers because they can't get pay raises. That was another big reason for a budget holdup is the House wanted substantial teacher pay raises and they were considerably off. So pay raises, salary increases, tax cuts, those were the big sticking points. And politically speaking, with the November 2026 election, it felt like something had to get done.
So the budget passed. I keep reading it passed with bipartisan support, but that's putting it nicely, I think. What does that really mean? Did any Republicans jump ship, and how many Democrats actually got on board, Brian?
So nearly half of Democrats in the House and nearly half in the Senate supported the bill. So it was about 50-50 within the Democratic caucuses. Now, among Republicans, it was pretty much unanimous with a couple exceptions. Those exceptions came from Norman Sanderson of Pamlico County initially, and then he voted for the bill on its final consideration. And then Bobby Hanig of Currituck County, and they took exception, they're Republicans, to these ferry provisions along the coast, which would basically do away with some of these free ferries and impose tolls in those areas or allow people to buy a $150 annual pass. And this was the first time Republicans objected to a comprehensive enacted budget since 2014. So it's quite a notable departure.
So I wasn't going to talk about ferry tolls because that's so far away from us, but I'm just curious. Is that still part of the budget? Are the ferries still free, or will you have to pay some sort of a toll to get on the ferry?
You will have to pay a toll. It's in the budget. There is some talk of maybe a technical corrections bill to undo that provision in the future, and there's still some debate of whether you can roll that back. But for now, there would be tolls, and
Well,
it's worth noting there are tolls on a couple of ferry routes already. This would make it so there's tolls across the ferry system.
because if toll roads are good for Charlotte, why aren't toll ferries good for the coast? That's the big question. So this was a fight for a long time, Sarah, between Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate. Democrats, I guess, were virtually shut out of these discussions because they are in the minority. Oh, what broke the logjam? Is it simply what Brian referred to, that the election is looming large and they didn't want to go into the midterms without a budget?
We've asked legislative leaders that many times, and they are kind of just like, well, we eventually just sat down at the table and we got it done. I think the election has something to do with it, and Democrats would probably agree that, people are upset with the federal government. So if they also don't have a state budget, then Republicans need something to campaign on in this November. And if they don't have, their little projects in the budget, if they don't have salaries for teachers, then what are they going to campaign on? So they needed to do something.
And would it be accurate to say that when I say that it was a fight between Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate, it was actually a fight between Senate Leader Phil Berger and House Speaker Destin Hall? Would that be accurate? And if that's true, would it also be accurate to say that perhaps the impasse was reached because of the waning power of Phil Berger?
It does seem like it was a bit of a power struggle between Hall and Berger. Hall, this is his first session, or like first 2 year session as speaker, and I think he's done things a little differently. I think he tried to draw a line in the sand with his tax policy, and Phil Berger was not having it. But then Phil Berger lost his primary, and that could have changed things. He still seemed to have quite a bit of leverage in this process, but that could have been the writing on the wall.
So I said initially that the governor has not had much to say about this budget, though he is scheduled to sign it at 10 o'clock. I suppose he could walk in and say, I'm not signing it, but he's scheduled to sign it by all reports. But shortly after the budget was passed, he did say this: the fact that we haven't had a full budget in 2.5 years is a real indictment. And then he added this.
It is a long, complicated bill. And yes, it has good provisions, it has some bad provisions, and my job as governor is to weigh those to determine what my action will be. I will surely do my homework. We need to do the thorough read. I mean, it's a 600-page bill. We are scrutinizing it. Every department is analyzing what are the consequences. The question is will this bill help us serve the people of North Carolina, or will it make it harder for us to serve the people of North Carolina?
That may be the question, but is the answer relevant? I mean, in other words, Bryan, what can he do about it if he concludes that it makes things harder to serve the people of North Carolina, aside from simply not signing it?
I mean, not much. I mean, there's very much been political pressure on Stein's part to point the finger at Republican lawmakers for their impasse, and it would be a pretty bad look, politically speaking, to say we need this budget, it finally gets to you and you to reject it. So I don't think he's going down that road. The only real question for us reporters has been, will he sign it or will he let it become law after 10 days without his signature? And the reason it could have been the latter would have been there's a number of provisions in this bill that strip his appointment powers for 13 different commissions, boards. That's probably a big thing he dislikes. And maybe he can sign the budget and then sue over specific provisions. We've seen that happen in the past, so you can still take to court the provisions you take exception to. But I asked Stein just the other day what he'd do, and he said he'll take action on the budget this morning, which is code, most people think, for he's going to sign it.
Yeah, and you're leaving at 10:40 or 9:40 to go to that signing. Would there be an event were he not to sign it? If he was just going to veto it, would there be an event?
So probably not, but
Okay.
but if he were to veto it, I mean, this is a bill that has support of half of House Democrats, half of Senate Democrats. It would be overridden. So at this point, it's really a question of when it becomes law, not if.
Is there a difference? As Bryan pointed out, Sarah, it would be overridden. If he vetoed it, they would simply vote to override it, and it would become law. Or he could simply not sign it, and it would still become law. Is there a difference aside from politics?
Well, the politics is the main difference. It's the optics. If you've spent this much time blaming Republicans for not passing a budget for over a year, then you waiting 10 more days to pass it just doesn't look good. But besides politically, I don't think there's much of a difference. It's going to pass either way.
So before we get into the details of this, which will be a little cumbersome, this bill covers the budget through 2027. when does the work on the next budget begin then? Because it took them years to get here, and we're in the middle of the budget. So when will they start working, Bryan, on the next one?
So the next process would be after you have the elections, you know who your membership is, and the House would pretty much start the process, I believe, for next year and draft its proposal. The Senate would draft its proposal in contrast to that, and then they'd work their differences out. In a perfect, ideal, theoretical world, the House would do this in April of 2027. The Senate would do it in May of 2027. And then we'd have a full resolution between the two chambers by June of 2027. But that's an ideal, perfect world that has proven elusive in recent years.
I don't know if either of you can answer this question, but I'm going to pose it. It seems that North Carolina has a problem passing a budget. It was the only state in the union not to have one for this fiscal year. The federal government hasn't passed budgets, really. They pass these continuing resolutions. Is there something in our politics that has crippled budget-making abilities of politicians?
I mean, if you ask the House and Senate, the House would say the Senate, and the Senate would say the House for crippling it. We had John Blust, who was on the floor of the House. He's a Guilford County Republican, and he referred to the Senate as a caucus of one, meaning this is Phil Berger that controls everything. And I think if folks can go back to the history book, there was a lot of tension between Senate Leader Phil Berger and then House Speaker, now Congressman Tim Moore. And the hope and expectation that folks had in the General Assembly was, oh, we've got a young Speaker Hall now taking over after Moore. A fresh face is going to lead to a smoother process, perhaps, a different dynamic. That did not prove to be the case. So now people are saying, well, if Phil Berger leaves and we have a new fresh face in leadership, will that change the dynamic? So it kind of feels like deja vu. Maybe it does change the dynamic, but it's still too early to say because we don't know who that successor is.
And likely whoever the new person is will want to put their stamp on things. Are there any provisions? This budget was supposed to be passed by 2025. It is the 2025 to 2027 budget. And teachers and state employees, Sarah, have been waiting and waiting and waiting for pay raises. Is there anything in the budget that makes those pay raises retroactive to last year, or do they simply begin when the budget is signed?
Yeah, so that's been a big point of consternation because they do begin when the budget is signed. There's a little bit of, one-time bonuses, but it's certainly not what it does not make up for that retroactive year. I think state employees are most upset about that, and state retirees who are getting a 1-year cost of living supplement because they say that doesn't even keep up with inflation. And teachers, state employees, law enforcement have been told to stick it out a year. You will get paid for this, and now they're not.
And so they're behind the 8 ball on last year, and this year when the raises kick in, they're halfway through this year. So they're a little even more behind the 8 ball. And we'll talk about the rate of inflation versus the rate of these raises because they don't match up. They're still behind the 8 ball. When we come back, I want to talk about these raises in particular, teacher and state employee pay raises, what they were, because I keep seeing these different figures of exactly what the percentage rate of these raises are and who they go to and who bonuses go to. And there are a lot of people listening who are affected by that. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the fact that they rescued Medicaid, at least for a while, through this budget, and public school funding, which is dropping under some of this because of various factors, which we'll also talk about. We're here with Sarah Michels, staff writer for Carolina Public Press, and Bryan Anderson, politics reporter for the Assembly. It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE.
On the next Charlotte Talks, climate change and its impact on Charlotte. We now experience nearly a month of extra dangerous heat days compared to 50 years ago. Extreme heat has become our top climate-related threat, impacting lawns, water, trees, and people. And we look into it all. That's tomorrow at 9 on 90.7 WFAE.
I'm Indira Lakshmanan. pickles are all the rage now, resulting in some odd creations.
I would never begrudge anyone of their pickle pleasure. If a puffed pickle cheese ball is where it's at for you and that's your level of engagement, I say go for it.
Never a dill moment. We talk to a pickle expert about the hot new trend next time on Here and Now.
Join us today at noon on WFAE.
Discover WFAE HD2, Charlotte's Jazz Channel, featuring legendary artists, timeless classics, and today's rising stars. You'll hear the music that continues to inspire generations. Listen on WFAE HD2, the WFAE app, WFAE.org, or ask your Apple or Google device to play Charlotte's Jazz Channel. It's jazz whenever you're ready to listen.
It's Charlotte Talks on listener-funded 90.7 WFAE and WFHE. I'm Mike Collins. We're here with Bryan Anderson, politics reporter for the Assembly. Sarah Michels is a staff writer for Carolina Public Press. They both cover the General Assembly, and this morning, in just moments from now, the governor is scheduled to sign the long-awaited budget. Teacher and state employee pay raises are in that budget. Teachers and state employees have been waiting for this for a long time. Most state employees will get a 3% raise, but certain categories will receive more, and it gets really tricky here, Bryan. So take us through all this, if you will. Let's start with, state employees and their 3% raise.
Yeah, so if you're a state employee, in most cases, you're going to get a 3% pay increase that's effective for the fiscal year that just started July 1st. And again, like we said, it's not retroactive. The House wanted it to be retroactive. The Senate did not. So ultimately, the compromise was make it going forward for the raises and add a one-time bonus, depending on a person's income, whether they make, I think, $65,000 or $75,000 or less. It depends on which kind of category of state worker you are. You might get an additional one-time bonus. But there is some other provisions as well that's relevant for state workers and retirees. Retirees are going to get a 2.5% cost of living adjustment. Both of these 3.3% and 2.5% figures are less than inflation over the past year, let alone the past 2 or 3 years since they've seen a meaningful pay raise. So it's a pretty notable gap, but for teachers, for law enforcement people, they're getting a lot more than 3%.
And we're going to talk about that. But the cost of living, Sarah, in North Carolina has increased between 3.6 and 4% on average since the start of 2025. So is this really a raise? Because they're still not keeping up.
Some would argue that it's not. I think, when you make a budget, they make tough decisions, and I'm sure not everybody was happy with this, but I guess they decided to give law enforcement and teachers more instead of the state employees.
And Bryan mentioned that these raises are not retroactive. The House had wanted them to be, the Senate did not, but they have traditionally been, at least in the past, raises that were delayed were retroactive. Why the policy change, Sarah?
I'm not actually sure why. I think the idea is that this one-time bonus can, stand in for that in some way. But again, like I said, there's tough decisions you have to make when you're doing a budget, but maybe Bryan knows more than I do on that.
Yeah, I mean, Berger has said that when we asked, why not make them retroactive, the reason he has said has been, well, we do have those one-time bonuses, and that is kind of intended to, in effect, be like last year's increases. And they would say on the Senate Republican side, they did pass a mini budget, which included step-up raises. But that basically just means if you've worked 1 year and now you've worked 2 years, you get an increase to reflect that, but that's not really a raise. So step-up increases having been passed before, and one-time bonuses are the explanations we've gotten from the Senate side.
So let's talk about teachers. According to the budget, starting teachers are scheduled to receive, and I've read all these different figures. Let me just throw them out, and you can correct me as I go through them. Starting teachers are scheduled to receive 17% raises, taking them from $41,000 to $48,000 a year. But Bryan, you report that the average raise is 8%. Explain that.
Yes. So if you're a new teacher, North Carolina now really wants to incentivize people to get into the teaching profession. So they've raised the pay scale from 41,000 to 48,000. And as you accurately noted, that represents a 17% increase. But when the average is 8%, that means, well, who's getting less than 8%? It's going to be those more experienced teachers. And if you look at the salary schedule, for your first 4 years of teaching, it only increases by like $25 a year. So you're going to go from $48,000 in year one, and then 48.25 year one, 48.50 year two, 48, it goes on. And then if you've taught for 50, if you taught for 25 plus years, your salary goes to 59,000 a year. So over the course of 25 years, the gap is only $11,000. So essentially what you're seeing is greater emphasis placed on getting teachers into the profession, but we've seen some concerns from teachers groups that you're not really incentivizing people to stay as a teacher. That's sort of the give and take we've seen.
And doesn't that, I mean, it would seem to me that in any business, you would want the best people. You would want the most experienced people. And yes, people have to enter the profession, no matter what the profession is, all the time, or the profession will die. But it seems to me that you want to pay the people that have been there for a while, who are experienced and you don't have to be trained. Are we thinking about this backwards, or is this a good way to think about it, I guess is the question.
I mean, I don't think anyone would say this is a step backwards, either the governor or the House side particularly. The Senate had advocated for like, I think $500 for starting teacher pay raises, and the House wanted it to go up by 9,000. So you had like one side says $500, one side says $9,000, and it ends up at 7,000. So it's pretty close to what Governor Stein wanted for starting teachers. And also to your point, there are like state and local supplements where, regions that are struggling to find teachers, that's why they have some of these supplements to entice people to stay. So it's not, the numbers we gave are kind of the floor, not necessarily the final destination. There's a lot of variance depending where you are geographically. But to your point, Mike, it's certainly fair that this budget, while it raises teacher pay, it doesn't raise it across the board evenly.
So when we look at the starting teacher pay raise from $41,000 to $48,000 a year, Sarah, where does that put starting teachers in North Carolina in comparison to South Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, neighboring states?
I've heard from lawmakers that this does put us at the highest starting pay in the region. I think the Southeast would be our region. But that doesn't account for, like you said, that's just starting pay. It's not for average pay overall. But when Republicans have received criticism about this not treating veteran teachers as well, they've said, well, this is still our largest average raise since 2006. And, maybe this is just the first step in a series of steps in future budgets.
More experienced teachers have long complained that they are being not treated well. They're not being fairly compensated for their experience level or for the higher degrees that many of them acquire the longer they stay in the teaching profession. How is their compensation scheduled to change, Bryan? Where is it going? What are they getting?
So I've not heard about master's pay. I've heard that as an issue that's up for maybe future discussion, but to my knowledge, I Sarah, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall anything about master's pay being in this budget. So some of the more experienced teachers aren't pleased with that. But that's the best to my knowledge.
Well, I read that they're scheduled to get an increase on average of 5.5%, which takes them from $55,950 a year to $59,000 a year, plus whatever district supplements may be coming their way, depending upon where they teach. That would be accurate?
I have no reason to question you, but I'd have to dig into it. It's
Okay.
somewhere in 634 pages, I'm sure.
I do know there's some, carve outs for advanced teacher positions, teachers who take the extra step. Again, I haven't done the line by line analysis of this, but it seems like they can get up to $5,000, $10,000 more a year. But it might be, you might have to meet quite a few requirements for that.
Law enforcement is another area of the state where we've heard a lot of complaints about being able to attract and retain personnel because of the salary level. But the State Bureau of Investigation and Alcohol Law Enforcement, they're scheduled to get 16% raises, according to one source. But Brian, you report that civilian workers at the State Bureau of Investigation will receive an average of 27.5% raise, with SBA officers getting 17.7% more. That's a lot of numbers floating around, but it's more than teachers. So
Yeah.
explain the difference in these numbers, and where will that put them?
Well, as the State Bureau of Investigation and Department of Adult Corrections has said, they are suffering from a major staffing shortage, and that has been a central issue. You see also in this budget a number of vacant positions being cut. It's just Republicans saying we can't fill these positions, so why should we appropriate money for things that aren't ultimately landing hires? The Department of Adult Corrections and others would say, it's hard to bring in people because pay is not where it needs to be. And so this is trying to address the issue of pay by having 17% increases for some, 20+% for other types of workers. Corrections officers are also seeing a 15% bump. So there's a lot more raises for law enforcement people than teachers. And the lawmakers would say it's the staffing shortages that are necessitating that. The Democrats would say, well, then why are we cutting these vacant positions?
Yeah, they're cutting 755 full-time jobs from state government. Is that all over the government, or are they in particular areas?
It's all over the government is the 755, but overwhelmingly, we've seen them with the Department of Adult Corrections. That has gotten a lot. The Department of Health and Human Services has also seen a lot of cuts. Some agencies are growing, like the State Board of Elections is getting an additional 14 employees. So not every part of government is being cut. But again, these are vacancies, not like existing employees finding out tomorrow they're out of a job.
And yet the Department of Adult Corrections has said that they're understaffed, and yet they're cutting staff. Are they cutting guards? Are they cutting clerical staff? Who are they cutting?
They're cutting vacant positions. So like when you need it's across the board. So there's like corrections officers, there's higher ranking people as well across state government, and across a lot of prison facilities, jail facilities. But for months and sometimes even years, they've either gotten no applicants or haven't been able to hire a qualified applicant. And so that is what is being cut, is the money that's given to hire these people that is not resulting in a person being hired.
I
So
will say
And of course,
there
go
is
ahead.
a carve out for some healthcare positions within these departments. They want to keep those positions there. And I might have misread this, but I believe in the techno corrections bill, they kind of went back a little bit on the Department of Adult Corrections vacant positions. I don't know if entirely, but at least a little bit.
Of course, as you would imagine, the State Employees Association of North Carolina is a little upset by these cuts. They say if North Carolina is being run like a business, it is a business in terrible financial shape. Cutting the workforce, shutting workers out from any raise only to follow it with peanuts is what a business does when it's in trouble. That's a quote. Is North Carolina in trouble, or is this just another example of Republicans who want smaller government, Brian?
I mean, Republicans would say, I kind of joke noun verb fiscal cliff. I mean, that fiscal cliff has been a talking point from Democrats for a long time, based on nonpartisan budget analyses and forecasts showing a major revenue shortfalls as we hit revenue triggers, and that leads to further income tax reductions. I mean, the state relies on personal income taxes to very heavily to collect money to then distribute across all the state government operations. And so the fear is if you're taking away the income tax rates and you're cutting off your revenue, that's going to lead to some shortfalls. Now, on the Republican side, Senate Leader Phil Berger had told us previously, we've seen these doom and gloom predictions of the past, and they've never come to fruition. The House has had some concerns about these economic outlook. And so to the point of, is North Carolina failing? I think what we could say is in the past, these predictions have not come true, but that is not to say that future predictions are wrong.
So Medicare costs, Sarah, have been rising, and this budget allocates $1 billion to cover the rising costs. And the budget is also funding expected costs that will result from the Trump administration's new work requirements that are outlined in the big, beautiful bill that he likes to call it. So these are administrative costs that have been shifted from the federal to the state governments. Is that what this is?
Yes, well, there's new work requirements. So obviously it requires a lot more administrative work to do that on quarterly, monthly basis, whatever it ends up being. And so you need staff for that, and you need people to be ready to do it. So you're gonna need a
Well, I
lot more
guess
money.
what I'm getting at is when the big, beautiful bill was being pushed through Congress and being talked about by Donald Trump and others, it was being touted as a cost savings. Is it, or is it cost shifting?
Well, it depends on who you ask, but I guess you could say you have the additional administrative costs, as you've said, but Republicans might argue that you are also going to be able to remove a good portion of the people who are on the Medicare rolls through these increased work requirements. And some people just won't do that. Some people won't qualify, and they hope that will make up the difference.
And I guess the question also is, this is not just North Carolina that's going through this. Every state in the union, 50 states in the union are going through this. So when you take the savings of the big, beautiful bill and then multiply the shifting by 50 for the 50 states, is there savings, or is it going to cost more?
I don't know. I guess we will have to do that analysis once this goes into effect and we have a few years of it.
So the new federal law requires Medicaid recipients who can work to log up to 80 hours per month of work or work training or school or volunteer efforts for them to be eligible for these Medicaid funds. And then they have to be checked every 6 months, which accounts for the need for more clerical personnel to conduct these checks and jump through the hoops that have to be jumped through. Do we know what the additional costs for that will be?
I'm not sure the exact numbers for it.
But the $1 billion should cover it. Is that what we're hoping through this?
That's what
budget?
we're hoping. We also have a lot of money for Medicaid. There's been a lot of talk of fraud, waste, and abuse. A lot of money for better data analytics and working on that. So maybe the idea behind that is to also, maybe you can use AI to help reduce the costs.
I'm sure that's coming down the pike. So Bryan has to go and be with the governor now because the governor is about to do something. We assume
He's about to take action, Mike. He's taking action.
He's taking
We don't know what that
action
action's going to be, but we're going to find out soon.
Okay. So that'll be at 10 o'clock this morning as we continue to talk about the budget. So we're going to let Bryan Anderson go because he has to make his way to the governor's mansion. And Sarah Michels will remain with us. She's a staff writer with Carolina Public Press. And when we come back, we'll talk about public school funding and we'll talk about taxes falling because that was something we brought up a moment or two ago. And the possibility, well, it's in the budget, so the probability of an I-77 toll lane penalty for those municipalities who said no after saying yes. We're coming right back. Stay with us.
Coming up in 20 minutes, 15 years ago, a protest with no leaders and no demands changed how we talk about capitalism. What's left of the Occupy movement? That's next time on 1A at 10 a.m. on WFAE.
Would you like to leave your mark and help ensure WFAE's future as a vital news source for the Carolinas? Consider making a charitable gift through your donor-advised fund by donating appreciated stock or through a qualified IRA distribution. These giving options are powerful ways to make a meaningful impact today. Learn more by calling 704-926-9323. Thank you.
Support comes from Givens Choice, a continuing care at home program from Givens Communities for those planning for retirement and want to age in place. Members remain in their home with the support of a traditional retirement community. GivensChoice.org. And by Renewal by Anderson of Greater Charlotte, providing window and door replacement with a variety of options handled by one team from start to finish. More information at renewalbyanderson.com.
It's Charlotte Talks on WFAE and WFAE.org. I'm Mike Collins. We're talking about the state budget, which is likely to be signed in about 20 minutes from right now at 10 o'clock by the governor. We're with Sarah Michels. She's a staff writer for Carolina Public Press who covers the General Assembly and gerrymandering and all kinds of things that go on up in Raleigh. We're going to talk about the aspects of the budget that deal with public school funding. That's the single largest state expenditure, public education. And this budget funds it at $12.5 billion, up from $11.9 billion in the past year. But there's also a reduction tied to enrollment. How much?
I actually don't know the specific details of how much.
Okay. But enrollment is dropping, and not just at CMS, which it is, but at other public school systems, partly due to demographics, but also due to these opportunity scholarships that are essentially siphoning students away from public schools into private schools. Is that happening all across the state, or is that mostly in the urban districts?
You know, there's not always schools for these there's public schools everywhere, but there's not always charter schools, private schools for students to move to in all the counties. There tends to be more access in urban areas. So I think it could be a little uneven there. What I find interesting in this budget is there's a provision that says, hey, we've saved $35 million from these opportunity scholarships because since they're open to everybody, maybe the state will provide like 50% of what they would have provided in per pupil funding to pay for this opportunity scholarship for a particular student. And they say, well, the other 50%, that's savings for us. And so we're going to reinvest that in certain aspects of public education.
Well, there is the $1.5 million reduction that is tied to declining enrollment, offsetting the expense of these scholarships, because I believe the scholarships are more than $1.5 million, I believe.
I don't believe so, no.
Okay. You don't believe they're offsetting it because
Yeah.
there's clearly a difference. The budget also earmarks $5 million for the use of AI education tools. Is this something that public school educators have asked for? And what are these tools?
I'm not sure if they've asked for it, but these tools, the idea is, I think they're using this Khan Academy, which is, it's a very good educational tool. They have a lot of videos and such. And the idea is to help teachers come up with better educational resources to teach their students. I don't know if public schools have asked for it, but I think the idea is that they realize teachers have a big job ahead of them and they want to ease their burden as much as possible.
Republican House members took credit for slowing down the Senate's more aggressive triggered tax cuts. The Senate really wanted them to go in a step-by-step fashion to the end of time, to zero, I think. But tax cuts are still coming. They may be a little slower than the Senate wanted. In 2025, taxpayers paid 4.25% of their income in taxes. What will that rate now drop to?
So now it's going to drop a little slower. Originally the 2023 plan was based on revenue triggers. So if the state, had a certain level of revenue, they would drop it a certain percent. Now it's tied to years. So in 2027 through 2029, it will drop to 3.49%. And then in 2030 to 2032, it will drop to 3.24%. And then after 2032, it will be 2.99% with the possibility of dropping all the way to 2.49% if you meet certain revenue goals. And that would be by like 2035.
So it is still tied in some ways to revenue collection.
Yes, at a certain point, once you get past 2032, it would be tied to that.
Itemized deductions for gambling losses are in this budget, and they are retroactive to January 1st, 2025. Why are deductions for gambling losses retroactive, but teacher and state employee pay raises are not?
That is a great question. I should definitely ask legislative leaders that. But there has been a lot of emphasis on, gambling, sports wagering, prediction markets in this budget. There's Democrats didn't talk about that specific issue, but they have had some concerns that there's a new tax on prediction market earnings that's at 6%, and sports wagering operator tax would be 23%. So they feel like that's encouraging operators to go into these prediction markets that might be a little less safe, and they are not wondering what the gap is about.
So let's be clear about that, because this is a whole new world for me. I know nothing about this. These prediction markets are things like Polymarket and Kalshi. These are places where you can bet on almost anything in the world, and taxes on that. There's a new 6% tax on that.
Yes.
And then for DraftKings and FanDuel and other sites that are strictly or mostly dedicated to sports betting, the tax is going from 18 to 23%. Who pays the tax, the bettor or the platform operator?
So it's the platform operator who pays these taxes, but as with many taxes, sometimes they get passed on to the consumer in some way or another. So we'll have to keep an eye out for how things might change for actual bettors.
Meanwhile, for those of us living in this part of the world, the budget also includes a provision that would require Charlotte and other local governments who voted to rescind their go ahead with the I-77 toll lanes vote. In other words, they backed out of it. They said, no, we don't want it. They would have to reimburse the North Carolina Department of Transportation for the $64 million in costs already incurred on the design phase of that project, of these now rejected lanes. This measure was introduced by a local senator, Mecklenburg-Iredell Senator Vicky Sawyer, a Republican, who called it a punitive measure. If it's part of the budget, do area municipalities have any recourse to this?
I suppose you could sue over it, but I don't know how successful you would be. Yeah, I've heard the same thing from Democrats, that they think that you should not be punished for listening to constituents and listening to public feedback. If something is not a good idea, you shouldn't have to stick with it. But Republican leaders have said, well, this has been in the process for years, so they feel like there was time to go back on this before this point.
Some have said that this is a way to force a rescission to the decision to rescind. Like, it's too complicated. It's to force a rescission of the decision to reverse course. In other words, they want to go back to where they were before they decided not to do it. And the interesting thing here, at least to me, is that the North Carolina Department of Transportation falls under Governor Josh Stein. They report to him. He's a Democrat. The legislature is Republican controlled. This region is blue. Could the governor decide, because he doesn't like the toll lanes, I don't think, could he decide that these lanes aren't the best option for Charlotte? And if he does, could he tell NCDOT not to pursue any attempt to get the money back?
I don't know, because I think in the budget, I think it's law. So I think he would probably face some opposition if he tried to do that. And as we've discussed, the governor has already had his power stripped away in various ways by the legislature year by year. So I don't think they would hesitate to, if he did try to do that, pass a law or something in the future preventing him from doing that.
You've mentioned this several times in this conversation, that the governor's power has been stripped away in this budget bill. And that's not the first time it's happened. And it happened with Democrats when the Republican governor was in charge, but it's happening more frequently now in this new age. And according to Dr. Chris Cooper, who's a professor of political science and director of the Hare Institute for Public Policy at Western Carolina University, this budget will make the nation's weakest governor even weaker. What does that mean? Put that into perspective. If he's
Right.
already weak, and now if he's already the weakest governor in the country, what's the point of having a governor?
You
What
know,
does he do?
Not much. He uses the bully pulpit for sure. But in a lot of states, the governors have various powers. They have veto powers. Uh, Governor Stein's veto power is pretty limited. He can't veto redistricting legislation, various constitutional amendments, various other things. He what else is there? Appointment powers is the main thing that's been limited in this bill. We've noticed in past sessions that there is the taking away from the election appointment power from the governor, giving that to the state auditor. Now we're kind of repeating that process by giving appointments the governor had to various commissions and boards to either another council of state member who is a Republican currently or the North Carolina General Assembly. So it's just a slow weakening of the governor's power over these boards and commissions, which is, the executive agency.
And it's the exact opposite of what's happening in D.C. We have witnessed a move there toward increasing the power of the executive branch to the point where the legislative branch could just go away. They're a non-entity. They don't take issue with anything in Washington that Donald Trump wants to do. The reverse, however, is true here. Both are Republican efforts. Democrats may have started the trend toward weakening our governor years ago, but the Republicans have put it on steroids. Have we lost sight, as somebody who covers the State House and politics, have we lost sight of the original intent of having three equal branches of government who provide checks and balances for the other? And if we have lost sight of that, can we continue to function as a democracy in the absence of it?
I do think we've lost that. I think, no matter what you're talking about, the federal government or the state government, power tends to get more and more concentrated in a particular body. Right now, it's the legislature and the General Assembly of North Carolina, and more specifically, it's in Philburg or in Destin Hall, and maybe some other of the people that they're closest to. So I think when you have that happen, you see what happens. You see this budget delay of over a year on the federal government. You see them not passing the budget or having all these issues. So I think when you lose the art of compromise and you concentrate power like that, then things hurt for the actual voters and the actual constituents.
And this, just so people understand who may be newcomers to North Carolina, the Republican legislature is not just targeting Josh Stein. They didn't just target Roy Cooper. They took power away from Pat McCrory, who was a Republican governor. Why? I know that in the Constitution, the governor is weak. It's written to be a weak. It's not a co-equal branch, evidently. But why is it just a power struggle? Is that all this is?
I think it is mostly just a power struggle. North Carolina, since its beginning, like you mentioned, it's been a legislative focused state. They were, if you go to colonial times, they were a little bit wary of executive leaders. And so they said, let's give us the most power. And I think that trend has just continued over time.
And one of the things that they recently did, and I think it's underlined by this budget, is election management responsibilities were shifted recently from the governor to the state auditor, Dave Bullock, who asked for $60 million to modernize the state's election management system. What is that system, and what about it needs modernizing?
So that system is so important. It's really what election officials use to do everything, to do list maintenance, which is like seeing who's on the voter rolls, making sure they're eligible, making sure everything's okay, counting, just like all of the data that you compile throughout an election, it's in that system. And you can ask anybody, this is a bipartisan issue. It's way outdated, and they really need to do something in the next few years, or it's going to be obsolete probably.
And Dave Bullock wants to hire more people. I think they gave him 14 people in this budget, and set up regional offices here in Charlotte and Asheville. Are those offices strictly for election purposes, or are they for the state auditor to have a greater presence in these municipalities? And I'm just going to point this out. These are both blue areas. Is that why they've been targeted?
It's just for the auditor in general. It's not just elections.
Okay.
But the auditor has gained a lot of control over elections. He technically has oversight, but state board of elections, county boards of elections are supposed to be independent. In practice, their lines have been a bit blurred recently. There was even an instance at one early voting meeting where somebody referred to Auditor Bullock as the boss, which was interesting. I feel like that's probably not accurate according to the law. But yeah, and the thought about them being in blue areas, I don't think there's been any secret about, auditing things that the Republicans are concerned about, like election integrity or things that might be happening in Democratic areas.
Before we run out of time here, we should mention that this budget also includes money, $792 million in additional Hurricane Helene relief. That's what the governor asked for $792 million. What did the lawmakers in the General Assembly provide?
It's about 709, I believe, if I remember the figure correctly. There's also some like 150 million that was previously allocated to other things that didn't quite get used. That's now back in the fund. But most of that 450 million of it is matching funds for federal things like FEMA. And the rest of it, goes through local governments, rebuilding homes and things like that.
Hundreds of millions of state dollars have already been funneled into recovery efforts in Western North Carolina, and most of the $700+ million in the budget would be used to unlock federal disaster aid. What does that mean?
So when a federal aid comes through FEMA mostly, they don't just give you aid for free. They need you to have a stake in it. So the state has to provide a certain percentage of those grants for the state to get it.
So it's like a public radio fund drive match.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Okay.
Exactly.
Sarah Michels covers the State House for Carolina Public Press. Earlier we had Bryan Anderson with us, who is off to cover what we think is the signing of the budget by Governor Stein in moments, in about 2 minutes from now. Thank you, Sarah, for the
no
hour.
problem.
Appreciate it.
Charlotte Talks with Mike Collins is a production of 90.7 WFAE. Support for Charlotte Talks comes from Mazda of South Charlotte. Our executive producer